There's a good group.
Yep.
We're working on Ruth, and this time is chapter 2. And I want to thank Meg for the great lesson last week. It was fun, and I learned a lot. When we left chapter 1, Naomi was coming out, had gone out full with her husband.
Shoot.
Liz, you are muted.
I did that, and I marked the wrong person, and I can't unmute her. Just a second. Let me see if I can do this. I can't unmute her. I don't know why it's not letting me, but.
I just hit
okay.
unmute.
Okay, you got it. Thank you, Liz. Sorry, that was my fault. I was trying to mute everybody else and didn't do a good job.
Did you hit the record button?
I did.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, off we go again. Thank you to Meg for last week. That was a wonderful lesson. I thought about it all week. And when we left chapter 1, Naomi had gone out full with two sons and a husband from a famine land, and at the end she comes back famine to a full land. Chapter 1 is private. Everything that's said is said in private. Chapter 2, what's said is said in public. Chapter 3, what's said is said in private. Chapter 4, it's said in public. So there's a real pattern to the story. Oprah. Well, you know, that is an interesting thing that Oprah was supposed to be named Orpah, and they got the spelling wrong, and mom just said, well, keep it that. But to name a child after the one who turned back, I think is quite interesting. And for Oprah to stay with her own people, I think might have had some influence on where her mother, they were, well, just think it out, that African black, and naming a child Orpah, I think is quite interesting. There's a legend that for the 4 days that Orpah traveled with Naomi, God gave her 4 giant sons, one of whom was Goliath that David killed. There are a lot of lovely legends around this. I was just sort of surprised at all of them. At the end, Naomi renames herself from Naomi, which meant pleasant, to Mara, bitter. Ruth also gets a new name. She goes from Ruth to Ruth the Moabite from Moab. So she really is pegged. When she gets back, she is not one of them. I want to thank John Jackson for telling me about the female commentators. I got 3 books by women because of that, and they call it a female travel story, and said there are several in the Bible. Sarah and Hagar, and Rebecca and Deborah, Rachel and Leah stand by their man. It's just fun to read things by women. The tone is different. And I wish I knew more about the women. I know their names. I'll take a look in the next bit and see. It's not in the books what their credentials are. So in chapter 2, the plot thickens. But first, an interlude on oral tradition by an expert in the field. Commentaries said this story was probably told long before it was written. And so I worried that it might not be, it's more of a folk tale than real. And so I call on Dr. Shields, Professor Emeritus, Emmanuel School of Religion, to catch us up on this ancient tradition. Dr. Shields.
Whether or not I'm an expert remains to be seen, I guess. Let me start by telling a story. I remember going to school from our house and stopping at my grandmother's house on the way to school and sometimes on the way back. We lived sort of back to back. Our houses were back to back. And that's my mother's mother, my maternal grandmother. And she would often ask us when we stopped in, we'd go through her yard on the way home and smelled the cookies baking. And so quite often stopped. And she would say, "Did you recite well today?" We never exactly understood what she was getting at. Did you recite well today? But later on, I began to realize that she, with her eighth grade education, had gone to a one-room schoolhouse somewhere and had recited every day. The teacher, the only way the teacher could check up to see if the kids were learning was to have them talk. Tell me about it. And those schools, after a while, were called blab schools. I don't know if you've heard that terminology before, but there was just a lot of talking going on. Of course, education had changed considerably from her generation to mine, and we were expected to have pop quizzes, written exams, and it was all reading and writing. When she went to school, it wasn't so much reading and writing, it was listening and speaking. That made me curious about education and about the way people learned and about the way traditions were passed on. She and her husband, my grandfather, were great storytellers. I had stories clear back to the American Revolution from my grandfather's side. My grandmother and grandfather both had connections with the Civil War. And so I had a lot of stories going on in my head at the time. And I trusted them. And so I thought everything that they said was perfectly logical and probably happened just the way they told it. She was born in 1870. I was born in 1937. A tremendous difference happened over that turn of the centuries. It's hard for us to imagine a time without printing. Although most of us know about Gutenberg and so forth, and how helpful that was for the Reformation, development of the Reformation churches and so forth. At the same time, it's even harder for us to imagine a culture which was almost without writing. And you know, if we can go back far enough, we get back to where the Sumerians start to develop an alphabet to write things in and so forth. But there were times when, way back when everything was done by word of mouth. And we have difficulty understanding that. The first century, they tell us, was the literacy rate in the Roman Empire was about 10%. So maybe 1 out of 10 could read. A lot of them couldn't write. Again, we seem to connect reading and writing because of the way we're taught. But a lot of people could read but couldn't write. And so scribes, you know, get into a business of being a scribe, or what the Greeks called amanuensis. and you can make a pretty good living because 9 out of 10 people would have to come to you in order to get a letter written or to get some kind of order put in. And the government, of course, could hire scribes full time to take care of their businesses and so forth. And so the 1 out of 10 perhaps could actually do that kind of thing. All human societies dependent on the memories of tellers to connect with history. And it doesn't take much research to find out something about the griot in northern Africa, the storytellers. My interest was not only in biblical storytelling, but also in Irish storytelling, since most of my ancestors were Irish and were good storytellers. So one year I took a sabbatical leave and for part of it took a course in traditions and literature at the University of Missouri, and found out got a good background in oral communication in that way. And then spent a couple of weeks in Dublin, Ireland, doing research on Irish folklore. And the University of Dublin has a folklore library in it. I found out after I got there that they were open only in the afternoons. So in the mornings I was going to the National Archives building downtown to do family history. And then in the afternoons, I went to this library and got pretty well acquainted with the librarian there, the folklore librarian. He asked me one time where my family came from in Ireland, and I said they came from County Donegal. And he pulled out a big map of County Donegal and pointed to a western part of the county up on the coast, and said, "You'd probably find them up in this little area." And I said, "Why do you say that?" And he said, "Well, anytime there's been a trouble in Ireland, there have been Shields involved, and they all came from up there." So I thought, oh, maybe my ancestors weren't just getting out of the potato famine when they came. Anyhow, pick up these stories. I found a book there that I found fascinating about how these storytellers were educated. And it focused on the city of Limerick, which we know something about from a lot of bad poetry. And the Limerick, the picture that they painted of that school in Limerick was fascinating to me. The students who were sent there were people who were already good storytellers, or they wouldn't have been sent to that school. The masters, as they called them, the schoolmasters, would tell them a story in the morning, and then they would go back to their rooms and rest and go through that story in their heads and get it as straight as they could, so that when they came back to later in the afternoon to the school master, they could tell the story. They recited the story back to the schoolmaster. And when I read that, I thought of my grandmother. How did you recite today? They said that some of them, to keep themselves awake, would have a big stone that they put on their stomach as they lay on their bunks, just to stay awake and memorize these stories. And then they would tell them, and the masters would say, "Well, yeah, you got this a little bit wrong, and you forgot about this part of it," and so forth. And they'd go back and do it again until they got it right. So it was just a matter of recitation, repetition, memorizing the story, and then going back and telling it again until they could become the storytellers for a whole community. It seems to me that that's probably the way storytellers were more or less educated in all these ancient cultures. and somehow they became a disciple of a storyteller, a rabbi or whatever, and would recite back to that person the stories until they got it right. Uh, John Foley, who was my teacher at the University of Missouri for that one class, had done a lot of research in Eastern Europe with storytelling people, and he had found out that even if they tape recorded a storyteller telling a story one night, and he told the same story the next night, and they tape recorded it again and found little differences in the two, the storyteller would say, "There's no difference." And they would say, "But here you use this word and here you use that word." You said, "No, that doesn't make any difference. The story is still the story." So the important thing became not the little details and the ways of telling, but the important thing was that the story was intact. It had been told for generations, and it continued to be told. And it seems to me that that's what we have in the background of a story like Ruth or Esther or a number of other uh, interesting stories in the Hebrew Bible, that for generations they would have been told. Perhaps somewhere along the line people would start taking little notes. The people who were telling the story probably who could read and write, and eventually the story got written down. Homer, uh, as far as we know, all of his stories were done that way. Some of them are lengthy. Uh, Even into the 21st century, the storytellers in Turkey and in North Africa and other places would tell lengthy stories. I mean, it would take all evening and then you'd come back the next evening for more. Um, and these people were trained to memorize these stories and make sure they got it right, even though, again, wording here and there and emphasis here and there might change from time to time depending on the interests of the audience. So as we're reading Ruth, it seems to me we can be uh, pretty sure that the basic story was precisely the story that was handed down from the time of Ruth and Boaz to the time that it was written down, whenever that was, um, because these people were not just making up stories, they were repeating stories that they heard from their teachers, and they became teachers and told the stories to their students and so forth, and made sure people got the story right. So that's about all I can tell you right now about ancient traditions and the story of Ruth. But that seems to me that that's an important piece of the background material.
Thank you, Dr. Shields. I thought it was too. And thank you for your interesting telling. Now, I did have some questions, and you can raise your hand. Who has read this chapter? Okay, that's good. And I will throw, who has read the book? I will throw virtual candy your way. So let's see. Mary, would you please read chapter 2, verses 1 through 7? And the rest of you, there will be an oral quiz at the end of this reading.
Now Naomi had a kinsman on her husband's side, a prominent rich man of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain, behind someone in whose sight I may find favor." She said to her, "Go, my daughter." So she went. She came and gleaned in the field behind the reapers. As it happened, she came to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was the family of Elimelech. Just then Boaz came from Bethlehem. He said to the reapers, "The Lord be with you." They answered, "The Lord bless you." Then Boaz said to his servant who was in charge of the reapers, "To whom does this young woman belong?" The servants who were in charge of the reapers answered, "She is the Moabite who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab." She said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the reapers." So she came, and she has been on her feet from early this morning until now, without resting even for a moment.
Wonderful. Thank you. Maybe people could be unmuted for a minute. Well, for a while. You know, we had Ruth and Naomi on this women's travel Thelma and Louise thing going on, and from the River Jordan to Bethlehem, they say, is about 4 days if you're walking. So I really think there was a lot of also talking going on. And I would imagine Naomi is telling Ruth about where she's going and how it will be. So whose idea was it to glean Boaz's fields, and why? Just it's in there. Take a look.
Ruth says it, but what you're suggesting, Liz, is they may have had conversations about Boaz and the family and all in those
And
days.
the land that Naomi had, and how does a woman get the land back in a male-dominated society? There would be a lot of talk. I'm sure there was a lot of talk. Yeah, it was Ruth's idea, but it was Ruth's idea probably because she had a background.
I was going to say, somebody has to know like who the local situation is and who has like wealth and money and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. These are strong women, I think. They're pretty good. Verse 3. Did this just happen? Because it just kind of says it just happened, or was it planned? And this can be more conjecture than fact.
Seems like a little bit by accident, because it says, turned out that she found herself in the field of Boaz. So it seemed like it's almost kind of an accident, but you wouldn't really think so.
Yeah. And maybe she was lucky that he was there that day, and maybe luck is God's plan, and maybe she knew he was coming back from where he'd been. Was it Bethlehem? Yeah. But I like that as it just happened. And then in verse 4, we come to the behold, which again, Bruce, I think it might just be good storytelling.
Yeah.
You know, as it happened, and behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem and said unto the reapers, here's God. You know, there's a lot. It's just a greeting, but here, one of the things that the book of Ruth is criticized for is not having a lot of God in it, but by the greeting, you can tell that they're godly people.
I don't think anything happens by accident.
Who said that? George, was that you? I remember Dr. Crowder saying there's no such thing as luck.
Or coincidence.
Somebody told me luck is living under Christ's kindness.
That's sweet.
Liz,
Yes.
are we? Oh yeah. Okay, sorry. I think the narrator at least intends to say that the women didn't know anything about it. I do wonder why Boaz gets mentioned first, but Ruth knows about the custom of gleaning, but I think in verse 3, as it happened, she wound up in Boaz's field. And then just in verse 4, just then Boaz came from Bethlehem. And then later Naomi's going to ask her whose field you gleaned in. And when she says Boaz, she's going to say, oh, that's our kinsman. But I think the narrator intends to say that God guided all this stuff, but the women didn't know. But that's just my
Well, it all is conjecture, but I like what you said, because you put Naomi's words in there too, which made it seem more like maybe not such a big plot, maybe guided by God rather than hatched out by women. That's a good thing. It's a lovely greeting, and the greeting is followed immediately by what question?
To whom did this woman belong?
Yeah.
and the answer is not to the point, quite.
Yes. Whose damsel is this, is what I've got. And then the servant. Take a look at what the servant, what is, okay, let's look. I'm gonna reread the servant's words. And the servant that was set over the reapers answered and said, it is a Moabitish damsel that came back with Naomi out of the country of Moab. And she said, I pray you, let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves. So she came, and hence continued even from the morning until now, that she tarried little in the house. So he makes sure we understand that she's not from here. But what does he imply? When he talks about her, what does he imply about her character?
He's a hard worker.
Yeah.
Very diligent.
Yes.
The reaper's response, there's all sorts of things that are triggered here when the reapers respond and say, the Lord bless you. And all of a sudden there's this young woman reaping from morning till afternoon or late. And Boaz is wondering who that is. My mind goes back to that the Lord bless you. And you wonder if the writer intended it to be that way as an answer to their blessing.
One thing about this also, that the servant, the one who's been out there working, actually allowed her to glean, knowing that she was an outsider. It's not just Boaz that extended grace, but the servant actually is the initial one who allowed her to glean, and Boaz kind of picks it up from there. So there's a lot of instances here where even her outside status was still allowed her to participate in the gleaning process.
There are two things about that. One is she's attached to Naomi.
Yeah.
That may be part of it. But also, as an outsider, she'd be a ger, an immigrant, a migrant. And earlier traditions, I got to go in my time, required that you allow immigrants, migrants, non-Israelites to participate in these kinds of things. And so the servant is practicing what should have been the custom. But I think their attachment to Naomi is important too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and the servant is not going to do something that is out of keeping with what his master has said. So that also probably reflects well on Boaz, that the servants are exercise some grace.
But didn't Boaz tell him, the Lord be with you? It seems like the Lord was with the servant that permitted her
Yes.
to. It is really intriguing language in that passage.
I have a note which says that Ruth was poor, foreigner, and a widow. So she was triply entitled to glean. She met all three categories.
My commentary said that there's nothing said about her beauty. And they thought perhaps that the first person to write this down might have been a woman, because a man would talk about her looks. They said the other book that's like that is Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Nothing said about her looks. It's all about her character. And nothing said about Ruth's looks. It's all about her character. And I was trying to put a face on Ruth. And I had picked Cy, Nat Nail's wife. But then later she carries home a bushel of grain, and I think it's not Cy. You know, it's
Something
so,
sturdier.
yeah. This is a working woman. This is a polite, articulate, working woman. You know?
So one of the things that impressed me is that, yes, they didn't say much about her looks, but they said a lot about her strength.
Yes.
She obviously was a strong woman, a woman who could endure, you know, it was hot in that field, and she could endure long hours working. And maybe part of this is influenced by the fact that we just watched the 4 episodes of Unorthodox on, was it Netflix? I don't know. Anyway, that's a very interesting show. And, you know, that show portrays Jewish men as not so much interested in looks, but how strong a woman is so they can bear children for them. And so I may be influenced by that, but it seems to me like what is said here is that Boaz is more impressed with the fact that she worked all day in the field, right along with the men, by the way.
Yes, I think so too. I think that really impressed him. I think it impressed a lot of people.
Yeah, and she may have had her face covered up.
Yeah,
I don't
and her
know
body.
how much
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how much covering Jewish women had on their heads, but definitely her head was covered.
Liz, we're at the
Yeah.
5-minute warning, and I would suggest that we finish up but not race through the end of chapter 2, and maybe keep working on chapter 2 next week, because we still have a lot of chapter 2 left to do.
I would like that very much, and we might start getting into chapter 3 then, Meg. You know, I would
but
like.
I don't think we should race, and I think we did have Bruce's excellent discussion of oral tradition, which was wonderful, but that did eat into some of our time of looking at the book. So we now have about.
I like next week. I would like a little bit on the Midrash by John Jackson. Is that a possibility, John?
Just keep putting the assignments out there, Liz.
What?
Keep putting the assignments out there. Give homework to everybody.
No problem. What I do. So thank you. I really have enjoyed studying this. And I'm to a place where I'm going to make a lot of assignments. I saw Lee Magnus do this as a musical for Vacation Bible School. The high school kids, Lee had written a play for the high school kids. It was And they put that on for the final program, and I just truly enjoyed it. Our girls were chorus girls, and Julie Crawford was Ruth. He might know who else did what, but that's all I can remember. But it was just delightful. So that's what I want to do next week is, well, I could even assign now. The rest of this is a narrative. And I had planned on doing it as a play with different people reading the different parts. So there would be 4, the narrator, Ruth, Boaz, and Naomi.
Do it.
Okay.
You just type up a little script and we'll do it. Or just
It's
something.
already scripted in the Bible.
Okay.
Narration. Just verses is all we need. You know, you do these 2 verses, you do these 3, yeah. So I thought with 5 minutes we'd be done about now.
We're getting close. So that's fine. We can just finish up. John Jackson has something he wants to say.
Can I say 2 words about gleaning?
Oh,
Yeah.
yes. He knows a lot about gleaning.
I'm one of the 3 people in the world that know anything about gleaning, but I'm being serious about that.
Yes.
The first thing to say is that Ruth's working for herself and Naomi. And so her hard work is not benefiting Boaz at all. It's benefiting the survival of Ruth and Naomi. But this whole idea of gleaning, which is basically in the law, at least as it's written, when you harvest your fields, you don't go back and pick up every last piece of fruit, but you leave it for the poor, and the poor are allowed to go through the fields of the rich and pick it up. And that was a social safety net. And gleaning was practiced and has been practiced in other parts of the world, maybe influenced by the Bible. But we have records of gleaning like in 17th century England and in early 20th century Macedonia. And the people who studied this suggest that a poor family that gleans could collect up to 15% of the calories they eat in a year in this method. So this is a significant way to supplement the livelihood of people who were just living on the margins. And so this wasn't just a strange custom, but it really was an important economic way to protect the poor.
I had read that gypsies do it today. In Somalia, they're gleaners. Generally, it's somebody who crosses the border and gleans.
We actually saw a sign a couple of years ago in Chuckey, Tennessee, in a tomato field that said gleaning. Somebody had on cardboard just, printed a big sign. So we didn't see any gleaners out there, but